did talk about the paper last time, right? When the final paper was due. I did talk about when the final paper was due last time, right? End of November. Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. So this is where we will leave Western Europe, or the Western Roman Empire at least. And over in the east, we had Justinian and Theodora. So Justinian was made co-emperor alongside his illiterate uncle Justin. He'd already married Theodora, who was controversial. How should I put it? She was an exotic dancer, air quotes. But she was also extremely intelligent. And while many people did not approve of Justinian marrying her and making her, not just marrying her, but making her his co-empress. As things happened throughout their reign, she proved that she was as good of a ruler as he was. For example, 532, there was a riot in Constantinople. Now, I'll say here it was over a chariot race. Their chariot races were like hockey games in Canada, you know. Yeah. Now, granted, there's always some amount of ruckus with these chariot races. However, their chants against one another soon turned to chants against the emperor about how they wanted to overthrow him, which then turned into a 3-day riot where they were burning down the city. Justinian was on the docks, ready to flee the city, but it said, and again, this is because of how old the sources are, we can't be entirely sure, but the popular history is that Theodora shamed him into staying. Since we're going to get done so early, I'll just show the video. But she says something like, "Purple is a great color for a funeral," which is to say, I'd rather die royalty than run away and live. Eventually, the army did put down the rioters. The emperor did manage to stay in power, and they killed several thousand people in the middle of all this. It wasn't just I said Canada during hockey games, but it was a big thing. Yeah, slightly violent hockey game. Yes. Let's see. So, after this, a lot of Constantinople had to be rebuilt. So he used this to build Hagia Sophia, which means Holy Wisdom, which is this massive church, this huge dome raised up above the square building, which was really the final massive architectural achievement in Western civilization until, I can't really say until the Renaissance, but of its type until the Renaissance, because we do still get like the Gothic cathedrals and stuff, and those were a pretty big deal. But as far as like domes and stuff, this was the last one until the Renaissance. Because after this, after the Western Roman Empire falls, the knowledge of how to make these kind of gets lost. Now, granted, as you can see here, after Constantinople eventually falls to the invading Muslim forces, they see this massive church and are like, yeah, you know, we're not going to tear this down. This is too good to waste. So they built some minarets around it and made it a mosque. So, yeah. Yeah, they're just like, we're going to use this. Are you kidding? So, yeah, that's why there's minarets. Just take away the minarets, and that's what it looked like before. That's the only difference, really. On the inside, plated in gold, well, gold leaf anyway. There was more gold down here, but over the years, as the city was dealing with various economic issues, they would use the gold for that, but then you couldn't quite reach all the stuff up here. And then, of course, as once it became Istanbul, they removed some of the images of God and the other, biblical characters, and put in just these symbols, because Islam is specifically an iconoclastic religion, which we'll get more into as we get further into the Middle Ages. But yeah, really, really significant building here, though, is what I'm saying. Is like, not just it's a big, pretty building, but like architecturally beyond what anyone else in Europe could even dream of at this time. So, after a small bribe to Persia, about 11,000 pounds of gold, not much, Justinian headed west. Decided to stamp out Arian heresy and take back Western Rome for, Rome. He was the one that sent Belisarius into Africa to overthrow the Vandals, which, as I mentioned before, was not too difficult because the Orthodox population were very ready to get rid of the Vandals. Not so much because they were these brutal, savage barbarians, but because they were practicing the, quote, wrong kind of Christianity. Because again, all these Germanic tribes were Christian by this point. But they were either Orthodox Christian, as per the Romans, or they were Arian Christian, which is like slightly different, but can't have that. However, the relative ease at which they pushed the Vandals out convinced Justinian that the rest of the reconquest would be pretty easy. So then they made their way into Italy, and it was awful. Gradually, over many years of constant warfare, Italy was eventually returned to the authority of the empire. But then by the time Justinian dies and the next guy takes over, it starts falling out of control of the empire again. So, it doesn't last very long. But the Italian campaign, the push into Italy, is considered one of the roughest military campaigns of this era of history. just because of how long it took and how many people died, and like entire cities were left depopulated. And again, I'll bring up the video if assuming I can find it here in a minute. Where they are like, if you were to go to a city at this time, the most striking thing would be that there was like nobody in them. They were just deserted. There'd be like a few dozen people in the city center, and there'd be entire sections at the edges of the city that would just be completely deserted. There'd be dogs and wolves, and just animals had taken over, and they'd be overgrown, because there just weren't hardly any people around after decades of war. And also, decades of war also mean famine, because the crops get destroyed when you've got military marching over them and murdering farmers and such. So that led to yet more trouble. So here we have the Byzantine Empire, and then the land that Justinian was able to conquer, at least for some time. And then things started to really go bad. So capturing Italy had drained the treasury in Constantinople, and while the West had been captured, it wasn't secure. This is, again, something that any of us that play like Empire Builder games know. Just because you captured something doesn't mean that it's, now yours without question. You gotta keep the enemy from taking it back, or the people there from overthrowing you, or whatever. And also, despite the, 11,000 pounds of gold they had given Persia, Persia started hitting Roman cities anyway, including Antioch, which was a major city in the Middle East. The Ostrogoths rolled in and slaughtered Milan, which was a major city in Milan's in Italy, if I remember right. King Totila tore down Rome's walls and burned the city, and for the course of a month, Rome was basically a ghost city. There was nobody there. Which, again, is unheard of. Rome was like considered the center of civilization in Western Europe, and it had been so devastated that it was almost completely deserted. Also, not just like people fighting each other, but we had natural disasters making things worse. So sometime between 535 and 536, there was a dust veil, a lot of dust up in the atmosphere. We believe it was from a volcanic eruption, not necessarily Vesuvius. Vesuvius was at a different period, but like Vesuvius, volcanic ash basically blocked out the sun, caused temperatures to drop, and crops failed all over the northern hemisphere. This was, no, we got another year without a summer. That happens in the late 1800s, I think. Yeah, so we just straight up had a sudden mini ice age, just out of nowhere. The sun's not getting through, crops are dying, temperatures are dropping, people are murdering each other. And then, because this wasn't bad enough, we had a little bout of the bubonic plague. Just a little. They call this Justinian's plague because why not blame it on the guy in charge? It's his fault that people got sick. Hit all across the empire, and in Constantinople alone, 300,000 people died. So, yeah, the 540s were bad. They were real bad for the Byzantine Empire. So here we have people just dying in the streets from the plague, women and children and just everybody. You know, if the plague doesn't discriminate, doesn't care who you are. And with all this going on, does fail play Germanic tribes hindering, well, just trade in general. Um, the western portion of the empire was pretty much gone. There was no urban life in the west. Cities and towns were abandoned. People were turning to hilltops. You know, we're going back to the Greek Middle Ages of get on hilltops, build a fort, throw rocks at people. As we said, even Rome was largely abandoned. It had gone from nearly 1 million people to about 50,000, which is crazy. At least in the east, things were a bit stronger. However, due to the overstretching or overextension, I should say, of attempting to reconquer these vast swaths of territory in the east, or in the west rather, Constantinople had to really force heavy taxes on its people, which there's whole stories of, like, supposedly Justinian would, like, prowl around his castle at night trying to think up new ways to grind down his people with more taxes. And then there was actual reports of like a soldier was captured in battle and was being held for ransom, and so his mother, like, collected the money for the ransom to send it to get her son back. And Justinian's people managed to intercept that, and so of course he kept the money and sent a letter to the soldier's mother, supposedly coming from the soldier, saying that the soldier would happily stay captured so that the money could go to Justinian to keep Constantinople strong. It's like, what the hell, guys? So even the relatively prosperous people in the East were having a hard time with all of this. Not just, the plague, but just economic hardship, which economic hardship is pretty nice compared to in the West, where they didn't have an economy. So you were bartering, sheep for wheat and all of that. So things weren't all sunshine and rainbows in Constantinople. And the conclusion, again, like I said, we're literally done with the chapter. Although I do have a little video to show you guys, and I'll post it up on Blackboard for everybody else. The city of Rome was no longer the capital after 476. Again, the year you guys need to know for this one. But the Roman Empire was still around. Constantinople was now the capital. It was the East Roman Empire. It was becoming Byzantium. But Rome was now becoming more Greek than Latin. While it was still Roman, technically, it was different than it had been before. Meanwhile, in the West, you had the Germanic tribes that were really taking over. who were, of course, being pushed west by the Huns, who they could do nothing about. Then we have what was essentially a small ice age, a famine, bubonic plague. The 540s were very nearly the end of civilization, or at least an end, and then eventually having to build back up. But thankfully, Constantinople managed to hold out. So civilization didn't end in the West completely. That said, it wasn't just the Romans. Now, granted, when I'm talking about human civilization ending, I'm just talking about Western Europe. There's still, of course, the Asiatic empires that are around and all these other places. So, I'm just focusing here. But yeah, the Romans were not the only civilization that existed. While a lot of the Germanic tribes tended to disagree with Orthodox teachings, they were still Christians. They were still, maybe not on, I was going to say on the same page. Maybe they weren't on the same page, but if you'll allow me to take this analogy a bit further, they were in the same book as the Orthodox Christians. And they were still very much creating their own civilization. And as we get into the Middle Ages, these are going to be the people we're going to be talking about. We're going to be looking at Clovis and his descendants, and the people that take over for them, and their descendants, and the ones who really create Europe. Constantinople remains a power throughout the Middle Ages, at least until the Crusades, when it's then these guys, it's these barbarians, these Germans who are now England and France and Spain and sort of Germany, we'll talk about that later, who are sending crusaders over to help Constantinople sometimes against the waves of Islam coming out of the Middle East. So yeah, there's going to be certainly a shift as we move on. So, I'm going to end the stream and see if I can find that video. If I can find it, I'll put it up on Blackboard. If not, I'll see y'all on Monday. We'll do the study guide.